My name is Mara Whittaker. I am 39 years old, and for most of my adult life, my mother introduced me as if I were a cautionary tale she had personally survived. She never used the word failure. Diane Whittaker was too polished for that. She preferred, "This is Mara, my unfinished project," followed by a little laugh and a touch on my elbow, as though affection could disinfect humiliation. People usually laughed with her because they thought she was joking. My brother always laughed because he knew she was. The last time she said it was at her 70th birthday dinner in the lakeside pavilion outside Millbrook. There were 74 guests, white linen tables, a rented microphone, and a cake tall enough to require structural engineering. My mother wore silver blue silk and the expression of a woman watching the world arrange itself correctly around her. She called me to the front, slipped one arm around my waist, and told the room, "Every mother has one child who keeps her humble." Mara never did find her direction, but at least she is dependable when chairs need stacking. The laughter came in layers. A few people gave polite little bursts. My aunt laughed too loudly. My brother lowered his head as if he were trying not to enjoy it. I stood beside my mother in a black catering apron because she had assigned me to clear plates after dinner. Then the glass doors at the back of the pavilion opened. An elderly man stepped inside wearing a dark green tie and a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored before suits learned how to be casual. He was 74, broad-shouldered despite the cane in his left hand, and familiar to anyone who had bought lumber, seed, generators, fencing, work boots, or storm supplies anywhere in the Central Plains. His name was Silas North. His family name hung above 112 Northline home and field stores across 4 states. He paused just inside the doors and searched the room. He was looking for me. What happened during the next 15 minutes did more than ruin my mother's toast. It broke open a family story that had been maintained for 21 years, exposed the reason my brother needed me to remain the family disappointment, and forced my mother to choose between the son she praised in public and the daughter who had quietly kept her house out of foreclosure. But to understand why an old man's arrival changed everything, you have to understand why I was wearing that apron in the first place. 9 months earlier, on the first Sunday in October, I drove 90 miles from Ashford to Millbrook for family dinner. I made that trip once a month with the same feeling people have before a difficult medical test. You know it is probably necessary, but your body begins resisting before your mind admits why. I passed the county water tower, the Methodist church where my mother had occupied the same aisle seat for 3 decades, and the old brick school where my brother had once been voted, most likely to lead. Nobody had created a yearbook category for most likely to believe his own press release, which was unfortunate because Cole would have won by a landslide. The house looked exactly as it had when my father was alive: cream siding, green shutters, 2 maples in front, and a detached workshop behind the garage. The workshop had been locked since his funeral 7 years earlier. My mother said she couldn't bear to open it. My brother said there was probably nothing in there but rust. I knew both statements were incomplete. I stayed in my car for a minute, watching the kitchen window glow. My phone showed 3 unread messages from our Nebraska district manager, a weather alert for freezing rain, and a photograph from one of our stores where a forklift had clipped a sprinkler pipe. I answered the urgent one, delegated the second, and saved the third for after dinner. At Northline, 380 employees ultimately answered to me through regional directors, distribution managers, safety leads, and store operations teams. My title was Chief Operating Officer. I was responsible for inventory movement, labor planning, emergency response, store openings, vendor performance, and the 1,000 invisible decisions that keep a large retail network from becoming one expensive misunderstanding. I had started at Northline at 21, unloading garden soil on the overnight shift, because no office had wanted a young woman with half a business degree and no connections. I became inventory clerk at 23, assistant manager at 26, store manager at 29, regional director at 32, vice president at 35, and COO at 37. My family believed I still worked over at Northline. In their version, I arranged seasonal displays and occasionally covered a cash register. I had never directly lied about my job. I had simply stopped correcting them, and they had done the rest. Inside the house, Cole was already telling a story. He always spoke as if a camera had found him. That night, he was describing a client he had rescued from financial chaos, using phrases like asset strategy and tax efficiency while his wife, Leanne, cut roast chicken for their children. Noah was 11 and quiet like his mother. Lily was 9 and incapable of pretending not to notice things. My mother sat at the head of the table, listening to Cole as though he were translating thunder. When I came in with a bakery pie, she kissed my cheek, inspected the box, and said, "Store-bought again. You never did inherit my patience." 5 minutes later, before anyone had asked about my work, she announced, "Mara is still at Northline. She likes familiar routines." Cole smiled into his water. "Some people are built for steady." "Steady is kind," my mother said. "I worry she has settled." The cruelty in my family rarely arrived wearing boots. It came in slippers. It patted your hand. It asked whether you were tired. It called itself concern. Halfway through dessert, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Halpern from next door had brought back a serving dish. My mother pulled her into the dining room and began presenting the family like pieces in a collection. "You remember Cole, of course. He handles investments now. People trust him with serious decisions." Then her hand landed on my shoulder. "And this is Mara, my unfinished project, still finding her way." Mrs. Halpern gave the little helpless laugh people make when they have been handed someone else's cruelty and don't know where to put it. Lily stared at her grandmother. Cole stirred his coffee. I told Mrs. Halpern it was good to see her and meant it. She had not written the line. She had simply been trapped inside it. Driving home that night, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. Nobody ever asked what I did. My mother's introduction made curiosity feel unnecessary. By the time I sat down, the answer had already been assigned. I learned early that good news did not survive our dining room. At 23, when Northline moved me from the loading dock into inventory control, my mother said they had hidden me from customers. Cole joked that I should count quickly before the company counted me out. Years later, when I became store manager, I told nobody except my father. He found out anyway. One Saturday, he appeared beside a fence-post display in my store, walked the aisles slowly, studied the employees and receiving doors, then gave me one small nod before leaving. We never discussed it. In our family, silence was sometimes the only language my mother could not interrupt. After that, I stopped reporting promotions, raises, and purchases. I thought starving the family of facts would freeze their story. Instead, the story kept deteriorating without me. Relatives began asking whether I had been passed over, whether I needed rent money, whether Northline was keeping me out of pity. Someone else was feeding them. The one person I still trusted was my cousin Paige. We met monthly at a cafe in Ashford, and she knew the real version of my life. The promotions, the house near the river, the paid-off mortgage, and the reason I no longer corrected my mother. Paige always said the right things. I heard comfort. I did not hear data collection. The first real warning came at Thanksgiving. My mother was criticizing the price of groceries when she glanced at me and said, "Of course, some people spend foolishly on renovated houses near the river and then pretend they're doing fine." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I had never told my mother I owned a house. I had never mentioned the River District. Only my attorney, the bank, and Paige knew what I had paid. My mother had the neighborhood right and the price wrong by almost $80,000, exactly the kind of distortion that appears when a private fact travels through people who want it to sound irresponsible. The next Saturday, I asked Paige directly whether she had mentioned my house to anyone. She laughed without hesitation. "Mara, you probably said something at Easter. Your mother asks questions like a detective. You know that." It was plausible. Good lies usually are. They do not ask you to accept something impossible. They offer the easiest explanation and let relief do the rest. I said maybe she was right. Then I started keeping a private timeline. I recorded what information I shared, who heard it, and when some altered version appeared in Millbrook. I did not use a spreadsheet at first. I kept the notes in the back of a small black notebook in my work bag, because admitting I needed a spreadsheet would have meant admitting I believed my own cousin was feeding my family. In December, Cole announced that he had taken full control of our mother's finances. He did it after dinner, standing beside my father's old chair. "Mom shouldn't have to worry about bills or statements," he said. "Everything comes through me now. I've consolidated the accounts, organized the investments, and set up the property expenses. Someone in this family has to be responsible." He looked at me on the word someone. My mother reached for his hand. I would lose this house without him. I lowered my eyes and did arithmetic. My father had died 7 years earlier. In that period, Cole's advisory office had moved twice, each time to a smaller space. He had also purchased a luxury SUV, remodeled his basement, and taken his family to a beach resort during the same year my mother said she might cancel dental insurance because money was tight. None of that proved theft. Plenty of people finance appearances. But operations teaches you to notice when the story and the numbers travel in opposite directions. I almost asked a question. My phone vibrated first. A store in western Kansas had lost heat during a cold snap, and pipes were beginning to freeze. I excused myself and spent the next 90 minutes in my car arranging temporary heaters, a plumber, overnight lodging for 2 employees, and an emergency delivery. When I returned to the house for my coat, I heard my mother telling Aunt Gwen, "Mara can never stay through a whole evening. Some women simply don't understand family." I had just kept a building from flooding and 30 employees from losing a week of work. In that house, I had abandoned dessert. The difference between those two truths became unbearable only after I remembered the promise I had made to my father. My father, Frank Whitaker, repaired grain dryers and diesel engines for most of his life. Near the end of his final hospital stay, he gripped my wrist and whispered, "Keep an eye on the house. She trusts the loudest voice." I thought he meant maintenance. The house was paid off, but taxes and insurance strained my mother's pension, so I covered both without telling her. Over 7 years, the payments exceeded $43,000. My mother believed Cole handled them, and Cole accepted her gratitude. At a church luncheon, she even offered a public prayer thanking him for keeping a roof over her head while I sat beside her holding coffee. I said nothing, but one question followed me home. If Cole claimed credit for bills I had paid, where was her money going? I asked to review one bank statement. She reacted as though I had accused him of a crime. "Cole is licensed," she said. "You manage shelves." The bank correctly refused to discuss her accounts, though a careful pause suggested a power of attorney existed. Suspicion gave me responsibility without authority. Then, in March, my mother ordered my father's workshop cleared before her birthday. Behind an old welding screen, I found a locked olive green fishing cabinet and carried it home. Paige called before I had even left the driveway to ask whether I had found anything valuable. I told her, only broken tools. Inside the cabinet were newspaper clippings documenting my entire career and a letter in my father's handwriting. He wrote that he had always known who I was, that being underestimated was not the same as being small, and that he regretted not defending me more. At the bottom, in darker ink, he added, "Watch Diane's accounts. Cole likes being thanked more than he likes being honest. Follow the house money first. You know how to make numbers confess." My father had not been asking me to clean gutters. He had been warning me. The letter rearranged 7 years of memories. Soon after the funeral, Cole had arrived with signature tabs and promised to simplify everything. Then came his luxury SUV, my mother's unexplained withdrawals, and repairs that were funded but never completed. One inconsistency can be memory. Several become a system. I still needed proof, so I tested the information route. At our next coffee, I told Paige, confidentially, that Northline might transfer me to Tulsa because senior leaders did not see me as executive material. 10 days later, my mother repeated the exact fiction over lunch and used it as evidence that I had failed again. Tulsa had existed in one conversation. I felt no triumph, only grief. Paige had attended my house closing and sat with me on my father's hardest anniversaries. I changed the subject, drove home, and wrote confirmed beside her name in my notebook. The pipeline was real. I gave Paige truth, and someone in Millbrook reshaped it into damage. At work, my life was moving in the opposite direction. Silas North visited the Ashford distribution campus every Monday. He had founded Northline 48 years earlier with one hardware store and still walked loading docks asking employees what slowed them down. One April afternoon, after we resolved a regional shortage of sump pumps, he took me to lunch near the original store. His questions moved from operations to leadership until he finally asked, "If Northline were yours tomorrow, what would frighten you most?" "Believing the title," I said. "The day authority convinces me I am automatically right is the day the company needs protection from me." Silas looked toward the old store. His daughter had died young, and his grandson wanted dividends without responsibility. The board favored an outside search, but Silas said the candidates spoke beautifully about leadership without mentioning employees. "I want you to take over Northline," he said. The proposal made me president and chief executive officer, with voting shares transferring in stages. I asked why me. "Because every hard problem becomes smaller after it reaches your desk," he said. "Because you understand that stores are people opening doors before sunrise, not signs on buildings. And because quiet is useful until it becomes hiding." We would sign on the Friday before my mother's birthday, with the public announcement Monday. Silas had one condition. He wanted to meet my family first, not for approval, but for context. "My mother's birthday dinner is Saturday," I said. "You could meet everyone." "Good." "It will not be warm." Neither was my childhood. I drove back to work with a succession proposal in my briefcase and my father's warning in my wallet. At one end of my life, an old man was offering me a company because he had watched what I did. At the other, my mother was planning a dinner where I would carry used plates. The contrast stopped hurting and began clarifying. 2 Sundays later, my mother presented the birthday program like a military campaign. The lakeside pavilion was booked. There would be a slideshow, live piano during cocktails, and a formal toast from Cole. Leanne was responsible for flowers. Aunt Gwen would manage the guest book. Paige would coordinate photographs. "And Mara," my mother said, smiling as if she had saved something special, "you can help the caterers and clean afterward. You are so practical." Cole laughed. Finally, an assignment in her lane. I said, "Of course." My willingness unsettled him. He had expected either hurt or resistance. Manipulative people become anxious when the usual button stops producing the usual sound. After dinner, he followed me to the workshop and stood in the doorway while I boxed my father's remaining tools. "Did you find that green fishing cabinet?" he asked. I kept folding newspaper around a socket set. "Yes." "Anything valuable?" "Old lures, rust, Dad's notes." His face stayed casual, but his right thumb began tapping his belt. Cole tapped when calculating. "What kind of notes?" "Measurements, parts lists." He held my eyes for a moment. "You always did romanticize him. And you always did inventory things you didn't own." His smile thinned. "Careful, Mara, you're starting to sound suspicious." "Only organized." He left without saying goodbye. That exchange told me my father's cabinet mattered to him, even though he did not know what it contained. Control had made Cole sensitive to closed boxes. The financial proof surfaced 3 days before the birthday dinner. My mother called because she could not find the deed to the house. She wanted to confirm the legal description for an insurance form. The documents were stored in a fireproof box in the hall closet. After 20 minutes of confusion, she remembered the combination and opened it on the carpet. The deed was there. So were bank notices she had pushed beneath it. The first statement showed a home equity line with a balance of $146,000. The house had been debt-free when my father died. The second was a late payment warning. Beneath that sat 7 annual distribution forms from my mother's retirement account, each documenting withdrawals large enough to fund a comfortable year. There were also transfers to an entity called CMW Advisory Services, Cole's company. I kept my hands still. Mom, what is the home equity line for? She barely glanced at it. Cole said it is how we preserve liquidity. What did the money purchase? He manages all that. The account is past due. He said banks send scary letters automatically. Your retirement withdrawals total more than $200,000. Her shoulders rose. Do not start, he has a license. A license is not a character reference, but she had built her peace around believing it was. She took the deed and went to the kitchen. I stayed beside the open box and read quickly. The signatures appeared genuine. The authority documents were notarized. Cole had not needed to forge my mother's name. He had persuaded her to place it wherever he pointed. The legal structure was cleaner than the morality. I photographed nothing. I removed nothing. I memorized dates, balances, and transfer names, then wrote them down in my car. The total visible damage was approximately $287,000, not including whatever had happened inside Cole's advisory accounts, or to the education funds my father had opened for Noah and Lily. The taxes, ND insurance I had paid, were the only reason the house still looked stable from the road. That evening, I went to Cole's office without an appointment. His suite occupied the end of a half-empty commercial building. A muted financial channel played beneath a framed certificate about ethical service. You open the document box, he said before I sat down. I saw the home equity balance, the retirement withdrawals, and transfers to your company. Her money, her signatures. The house is past due. She thinks you pay taxes I have paid for 7 years. For 1 second, irritation replaced his confidence. Then he smiled and asked what I wanted. The power of attorney revoked. Independent management. No new withdrawals. A complete accounting, including the children's funds. You establish repayment terms and we handle it privately. He laughed at the idea that someone with my little operations job could issue terms. Then he explained his real protection. My mother trusted him, the church trusted him, and nobody in Millbrook knew enough about my life to believe me. You built the family story about me as insurance, I said. You helped, he replied. Silence leaves room. He admitted Paige had provided information after he helped her financially. He called it keeping the family informed. I called it manufacturing context. Cole stood and walked me to the door. Those documents are legal. Mom will defend me. If you make noise, I will tell everyone Northline fired you and you are lashing out because you are desperate. Your reputation is already built. He had spent years making me unbelievable before I knew I would need to be believed. I am giving you until Monday, I said. After that, the records become professional work. He smiled. Good luck finding a professional who takes you seriously. I left knowing his entire defense depended on one assumption, that I was nobody. The next morning, elder law attorney Annika Shaw confirmed the difficulty. Because my mother had signed voluntarily and still had legal capacity, criminal action would be complicated. But with her consent, the power of attorney could be revoked immediately, accounts frozen, records preserved, and a forensic accountant appointed. Misuse could lead to restitution, civil liability, professional discipline, and possible criminal referral. The law can open a door, Annika said. Your mother still has to walk through it. That afternoon, Silas called to ask whether there was anything he should know before Saturday. For the first time, I told someone the whole truth before circumstances forced me to. The introductions, Cole's control, Paige's leaks, the debt against the house, and the risk of a public scene. I offered to postpone the succession. Silas was quiet, then said, "My father called me useless until the day he died. Family shame does not disqualify a leader. Hiding from it forever might." We signed Friday at 5 in a law office overlooking the rail yard. No cameras, no music, only legal explanations, a fountain pen and freight cars coupling in the distance. When the final page was complete, Silas shook my hand. "Welcome to the difficult chair, Madam President." The announcement remained confidential until Monday. Cole used the final weekend to spread one last lie. He told my mother, Aunt Gwen, and Paige that Northline had fired me after the Tulsa transfer collapsed, then asked them not to mention it at the birthday dinner because he did not want me humiliated. By Saturday morning, half the guest list believed I was unemployed. My mother called to remind me to use the service entrance and wear something suitable for helping the caterers. "Cole says you have had a difficult week," she added, "but tonight is not about you." I looked at the signed agreement on my table. "No," I said, "it definitely is not." Before leaving for Millbrook, I opened my father's letter one more time. The paper had softened at the folds, and the final sentence, "You know how to make numbers confess," no longer felt like a burden. It felt like permission. I placed the letter, the tax receipts, and Annika's card in a plain envelope. Then I hung my new executive blazer in the closet and chose the catering apron instead. That choice was not surrender. It was evidence control. If I arrived dressed for a victory nobody understood, Cole would begin rewriting it before the first course. If I argued with my mother, the evening would become a story about my jealousy. Silence gave them enough room to reveal exactly who they were when they believed I had nothing left. Silas sent one message: "I will arrive after the toast. Let people finish their sentences." I read it twice, put my phone away, and drove toward the family that thought my story had already ended. At 3 that afternoon, I entered the lakeside pavilion through the kitchen door wearing black trousers, a cream blouse, and the apron my mother had left on a chair with my name pinned to it. The room overlooked the lake through tall glass panels. My mother moved between tables adjusting place cards by fractions of an inch. Cole tested the microphone. Paige arranged family photographs on an easel and avoided my eyes. Leanne found me near the coat room. She looked exhausted. "There is something you need to know about the children's accounts," she whispered. "I found transfers. Cole said he borrowed it temporarily, but—" My mother called her name from across the room. Leanne flinched. "After dinner," she said, "I promise." By 6:30, every chair was occupied. Church friends, neighbors, former teachers, Cole's clients, and relatives who had not called me in years filled the pavilion. My mother floated among them in silver blue silk. Cole shook hands like he was running for office. I carried water pitchers, replaced forks, and watched people glance at me with the careful pity reserved for someone whose bad news is supposedly secret. Lily found me while I was arranging dessert spoons. She had heard her grandmother use the phrase "unfinished project" before, but that evening she finally asked what it meant. I told her it was something people said when they expected another person to become different. Different how? She asked. Usually more convenient. She considered that seriously. Are you unfinished? I looked across the room at my mother correcting a florist who had followed her instructions exactly. Everyone is unfinished, I said, but nobody gets to use that as a leash. Lily nodded as though I had confirmed something she already suspected. Then she slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Dad says you got fired." I know. Did you? No. Her eyes widened, but I put one finger to my lips. She smiled for the first time that evening. Children understand secrets differently from adults. Adults use them to control the room. Children hold them like small lights. Paige cornered me beside the service station. I heard about Northline, she said. I am so sorry. Are you? Her face tightened. You seem strangely calm. I have learned not to panic over stories before checking the source. She went pale. Dinner ended at 8. Cole delivered a long toast about devotion, sacrifice, and the blessing of being the child a parent can depend on. My mother cried at exactly the right places. Then she took the microphone. She thanked everyone, praised Cole as her protector, praised Leanne for the flowers, praised Paige for the photographs, and finally looked toward the kitchen doors. Mara, come here, sweetheart. I walked forward. The room became expectant in the way crowds do when they know a familiar joke is coming. My mother placed her arm around me and smiled. This is my unfinished project, she said. She never found the success her brother did, but she is dependable when there is work nobody else wants. Every family needs one. The laughter was softer than usual because many guests believed I had just lost my job. Pity had made them cautious, not kind. Lily did not laugh, neither did Leanne. I stepped away from the microphone. Paige followed me into the hallway, breathing too fast. I have to tell you something, she said. Cole helped me when I was behind on rent. Then he started asking what you told me. At first, it was small things. Your job, your house, whether you were seeing anyone. Your mother called too. I thought if she understood how well you were doing, she would stop. How long? 12 years. The number landed without surprise. I had already mourned the friendship on the drive home from the Tulsa dinner. Paige's eyes filled. She knew about the regional promotion. She knew you ran multiple stores. I told her because I thought she would finally be proud. She said, if Mara succeeded without needing me, what does that say about the life I gave up? After that, she told me never to correct the family in public. There it was. My mother had not misunderstood me. She had rejected the evidence because my success felt like an accusation. Thank you for telling the truth, I said. You should have tried it before it became expensive. The glass doors opened behind us. Silas North entered with his cane in one hand and his attorney beside him. The nearest tables recognized him first. Conversation collapsed across the pavilion in a widening circle. Cole saw an opportunity. He hurried forward with the microphone still in his hand. Mr. North, welcome. Cole Whitaker, financial advisor. Are you a friend of my mother, S? Silas shook his hand briefly. No. He looked past him, found me beside the hallway, and crossed the room. He removed the coffee pitcher from my hand, placed it on a table, and turned toward the guests. "Forgive the interruption," he said. "I intended to wait until Monday, but Mara's family deserved to hear this before the newspapers." Nobody moved. 48 years ago, I opened one hardware store. Northline now has 100 and TW. 11 locations. On Friday, I signed the agreement transferring leadership of that company to the person who has quietly been running its hardest parts for years. He faced me. Mara Whittaker is Northline's new president and chief executive officer. She began on an overnight unloading crew and earned every office, every key, and every decision between there and here. I have never met a more capable operator. For one full second, the room had no sound. Then chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Applause began at a table of contractors who understood exactly what the title meant and spread through the pavilion. Lily climbed onto her chair and shouted, "That is my aunt." My mother stood beside the cake with the microphone hanging at her side. Her expression was not pride. It was disorientation. The story she had used to organize the family had stopped obeying her in public. Before I spoke, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "Your father came into my first store with $12 and left with a used wrench set. He argued over the price for 20 minutes. I almost laughed. That detail was so perfectly my father that it steadied me more than any applause could. Across the room, Aunt Gwen had begun crying into a napkin. Two of Cole's clients were whispering to each other. People who had accepted my mother's version for years were now trying to rebuild their memories fast enough to avoid admitting what they had enjoyed. A woman from the church reached toward me and said, "We had no idea." "You had no questions," I answered. The distinction silenced her. Silas handed me the microphone. I looked at the room, then at my mother. "For 21 years, you have introduced me as something incomplete," I said. "I stopped correcting you because every fact became another joke. But silence did not make your version true. It only made it convenient." I turned toward Cole. "On Monday morning, Northline's announcement will be public. Also on Monday, an attorney and forensic accountant will request the records connected to Mom's home equity line, retirement withdrawals, your advisory company, and Noah and Lily's education funds." Cole's face emptied. "This is insane," he said. "She is performing. She has lied to this family for years." "No," Leanne said. Her voice shook, but it carried. She stood with one hand on Lily's shoulder. "Tell them why your mother owes $146,000 on a house that was paid off. Tell them where the children's money went. I found the statements in March. You told me it was temporary." Cole looked around at clients, relatives, and his in-laws. He had built his business on being trusted in rooms exactly like this one. No explanation could survive all of them at once. He called Leanne confused. He called me vindictive. He called the documents complicated. Then he left through the same doors Silas had entered. My mother remained beside the cake. I placed an envelope on the table in front of her. Inside were 7 years of tax and insurance receipts, copies of my father's letter, and Annika Shaw's card. "You kept this house because I paid the bills Cole claimed to pay," I said quietly. "Dad knew what might happen. The accounts can still be protected, but you have to choose facts over the son you advertised." She looked at the envelope, but did not touch it. I removed the apron, folded it once, and placed it beside the microphone. In the parking lot, my mother caught up with me. "You humiliated me at my own birthday." I answered an introduction you chose to make. "You planned that man's entrance." I told him the truth. He decided what to do with it. Her voice cracked. "If you built all of that without me, then what was I for?" For the first time, I saw the fear beneath her cruelty. She had abandoned nursing school when she married my father. She had spent years insisting sacrifice made her morally superior to anyone who left. My independence did not merely surprise her. It threatened the meaning she had assigned to her own choices. I understood her. I did not excuse her. "You were my mother," I said. "That should have been enough. You did not need me to fail so your life could matter." I opened my car door. "The attorney will call Monday. Take the help. Save the house. But you do not get to introduce me anymore. From now on, I speak for myself." She stood under the parking lot lights with no audience and no prepared line. On Monday, the North Line announcement went public. My phone filled with messages from relatives claiming they had always believed in me. I ignored them and walked the original store with Sela's before sunrise. My mother accepted the legal help 2 days later. The power of attorney was revoked. The accounts were frozen. The equity line was blocked from further withdrawals. A forensic review traced years of transfers through Cole's company and into personal expenses. Facing a civil suit, professional discipline, a ND possible criminal referral, he signed a restitution agreement secured against everything he still owned. He sold the SUV. His license was suspended. His office closed before winter. The meeting where my mother agreed to act was not dramatic. She sat in Annika's conference room with both hands around a glass of water and resisted every fact until the accountant placed the transactions in chronological order. Roof money had funded Cole's vehicle deposit. Retirement withdrawals had covered business losses. Payments marked family assistance had reached accounts my mother had never seen. The Children's Education Fund had been used to keep his office open. At first, she kept saying, "He must have had a reason." Then the accountant showed her a transfer made on the same day Cole had accepted public praise for paying her insurance, a premium that had actually come from me. My mother stopped defending him. She did not apologize to me. She simply signed the revocation documents with a hand that shook. That was the moment I understood that consequences and reconciliation are not the same thing. Saving her house did not restore the years she had chosen humiliation over curiosity. I could protect her finances without returning to the role she had assigned me. Help did not require access. Love did not require surrender. Leanne filed for separation. We rebuilt the children's education funds in accounts Cole could never access. Paige sent me a long apology. I answered with one sentence. "Remorse is not repair, but truth is where repair begins." We have not returned to our old coffee table. The first month as president was less cinematic than the announcement. It was vendor negotiations, staffing reviews, storm preparation, and learning which executives brought solutions into a room and which ones brought vocabulary. I kept Silas's Monday walk. At 6 every Monday, we crossed the distribution floor together until he gradually stopped answering questions before I could. That was how he transferred authority, not with a speech, but by allowing employees to look to me first. News of the birthday dinner traveled through Millbrook faster than the company announcement. People who had laughed began sending explanations. They had thought my mother was teasing. They had never understood. They wished they had said something. Most apologies were written in passive voice, as though the laughter had occurred without mouths. I did not organize revenge. I organized access. Cole received communication through attorneys. Paige no longer received private information. My mother could call, but I ended every conversation the moment she compared me to my brother or tried to turn the investigation into disloyalty. Boundaries felt cruel only because my family had benefited from their absence. 3 months after the party, my mother called. There was no apology and no performance. She told me the furnace had been serviced and thanked me for arranging it. We spoke about the weather, then about Lily's school play. Before hanging up, she said, "Good night, Mara." My own name sounded different without a label attached to it. Here is what I learned from spending half my life as somebody else's unfinished project. People who benefit from misunderstanding you will call your silence proof, your boundaries cruelty, and your success betrayal. Let them. A false story can survive for years inside a closed room, but it cannot survive forever once the doors open and the records arrive. Share this story with someone who has been forced to live under a family label that was never true. Tell me in the comments when you finally stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Subscribe to After Silence Stories, and I will meet you in the next episode, where another quiet truth finally gets its turn to speak.